Julian, all yours. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. So am I on screen here for everybody? All right. Hi. Well, hello. I want to thank LABASAD for having me and allowing me to present to you today. I have to say, like, I have a very unusual career, so I'm not. I'm sort of unprofessional in some ways. So I have a very hard time making a presentation that has a lot of bullet points in it. I tend to be more focused on images and just kind of talking and trying to talk through why I made things and what I was thinking. I'm going to share my screen now. 1 second here. Okay, so we're starting. So just to start off, just to tell you where I live in New York State, but it's very, very far from New York City, 600 kilometers from New York City, and much, much closer to Toronto. So I just thought I'd take the opportunity to tell you that, because usually when you say you're from Buffalo, New York, people really don't understand just how far away you can be from New York City and still be in the same state. I'm just going to leave this slide for a second, but so just my background is a little complicated, in that I didn't go to school for art or design. I went to university for other subjects, and I realized just as I was finishing my education, like what I really wanted to be doing. And this was in the middle 90s. So graphic design was changing at the time, and the computers were making things much more easy to access. But so I really didn't as soon as I graduated, I realized, like, I want to be doing design, and I'd always kind of done art on the side. But so I don't have a proper training, but I did grow up in kind of an art environment. My father taught art history and design history. And these are some of the European posters that I had growing up, which in some ways you might see in my work, like, this style really is something I keep coming back to and is a real influence on me. The sort of mid-20th century, particularly like the 60s and 70s, and modernist graphic design are really an important influence for me. And it's something that I kind of grew up being exposed to. So when I talk about what I do, I have basically two careers, or I think of it as two careers. In one, I do graphic design and illustration, and that's basically, work for clients in a variety of different clients. I have some very small, a lot of clients that are local here in my region for the local university and some arts groups, and we'll see some of that work. And then I also sometimes do things for larger corporations and more international things. I also do a fair amount of music packaging. That's more happening in more recent years. So sometimes that's just a small band, in Switzerland contacts me and asks me to design something for them. And lately I've been doing more proper illustration, where some editorial illustration, where a publication is asking me to illustrate something specific. That's a more recent development. So that's one side of what I do. And then on the other side is my art career, which has been going the same amount of time as my design career. And in that career, I will be going through some of that work as well. And I've over the years, have done a series of large conceptual projects that involve photography, also involve the tools of graphic design, involve painting. But I use a lot of what I know from graphic design to make art. And part of what I'm going to be talking about today is the way that those two practices overlap one another and influence each other. And at this point where I am is that sometimes the value of making the art, it exists for its own reasons, but also it has a huge influence back on my design, and vice versa. My design influences my art, and you'll see what I mean when we go through this. And that is partly what I wanted to talk about in the sense of, I think you'll see throughout all of my work, the great value of self-initiated projects. And I think when you're an artist or an illustrator, right? An illustrator, you're almost always sketching and making drawings, and you sort of have this practice of constantly making things. And when you're an artist, a fine artist, contemporary artist, no one is asking you to make work. You have to basically, make it on your own and then show it to people and hope that they're interested. But when you're a graphic designer, you're very much oftentimes stuck in a just mode of a client is asking for something and you are delivering it. And I think a lot of people know, especially when you're young and starting out, that is very limiting because you don't always get to work on projects that are exciting or interesting. And for me, because I was in a situation where I was trying to get work as a graphic designer where I hadn't been to school, so I had no portfolio. I really had to start my own projects to sort of fill in that portfolio. And obviously now a lot of people, what's different between now and when I started is that you have something like Instagram. So if you're to make a project for yourself, there's actually a place to put it. There's a place to have people see it. And I'm a big advocate lately, and I'll show you as I go through what I do. I've just come to realize just how important it is to always be having a side project or a side creative project outside of your official design practice, because I think it's a great way of well, for one thing, as graphic designers, it's often very frustrating because there's the dream job that you're waiting to get. And in the meantime, you have to design sometimes some very boring or limited things, or you're working with clients that aren't interested in, the visual ideas that you have. And so in some ways, and I do this a lot, which we'll see, I sort of use these projects to sort of just create design that I want to see. And by doing that, I end up creating, I get better at being a designer. I get more sensitive. And then I also have like a lot of ideas that I've developed that when the time comes, sometimes I'm able to use on proper jobs. And just that constant process of creating and visually thinking, I think is extremely beneficial. And I think that in a weird way, like and I'll talk about this further, but when people come to me now for work, wanting me to do a job, sometimes the things they'll say that I've done that they like will be very mixed. It may be like they like a painting that I did, some like fictional design that I did, a real job that I did, and then something that I didn't even design, but I posted on Instagram, but sort of fits in with my aesthetic. So I think of it now, my practices as being very holistic, like they all connect to one another. And by the way, this image here is something I found in a secondhand store years ago, which is a very delusional kind of little sewn thing. But I find it sort of amusing as kind of a very funny message. And also just someone had taken the time to make this is very funny to me. Okay, so I'm going to just go through some of my, it's hard to know what order to show you things, but I'm going to just go through what I do in graphic design and illustration. So a lot of what I do is for print, which these days there aren't as many jobs in that, but I do a lot for the local university here. So these are 2 folding poster mailers. I do a lot of image making in what I do. I also work for a literary organization that brings in authors every year. So for 12 years, I've been designing the campaign for these author talks. And each year I do it I try to redesign it. Some years are better than others looking back. When you do something for 12 years, some of the older ones you realize things have kind of gone out of style, but these are some of the more recent ones that I still enjoy looking at. Another festival that I do is every year. I think this is the 6th year, but every year they have a theme, and there's a space for me to kind of illustrate that theme. And they have a series of speakers and so forth. I also do branding and identity, but I will say that it's very, very limited in the sense that I do design logos and things, and I've done some branding projects. I mean, what we were just looking at are branding projects, but I don't really offer what I call full service branding. I work by myself, so I'm very, the scope of what I'm capable of doing on my own is somewhat limited, and also what I'm interested in. I'm sort of interested in the initial process of making the image. I'm less interested in figuring out a brand strategy. I'm not really qualified for that. So these are just like a sense of some of the logos that I do. And I find logos and identity to be one of the hardest things, actually, because of the expectations of the client and how much back and forth it takes. But so every once in more increasingly, I do projects for bigger clients. And one of them is Sonos, the speaker company. And this one was a booklet they wanted me to illustrate for reasons why people aren't listening to stereo systems, and basically making the pitch that you should use Sonos speakers because they're a higher quality. And this is one of my first sort of experiences with a much bigger company. I do book covers, and you'll see if you know my Instagram feed, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm very interested in book covers, mid-century book covers, and I'm very inspired by them. And I don't actually design that many book covers in real life. You'll see I design many in unreal life. But here are a few, but I do from time to time, and these are a few covers I've designed. This is a book I recently designed for. There's a guy in Adelaide, Australia, who's compiling photographs of modernist homes in Adelaide. So he reached out to me to design his book. I do some full publication design, but increasingly I am less interested in the complicated parts of putting a book together. I'm much more interested in the fun stuff. So also starting in 2013, I started to do more music packaging. This is for a Bronze Rat Records sub-label, which is based in Berlin. And growing up in the 80s, like, record covers were something that really inspired me. And I always wanted, and one of the reasons I got into graphic design was to do things related to music. But for whatever reason, I mean, I started late, and then I basically didn't start doing record covers until I was 40 years old. So it's sort of funny, but this was really something I'd always wanted to do, was to design a series, and where the records would have a sort of like similar format, and you'd have the spines look like that. So this was very satisfying to do. And I'm now currently working on another series, which we'll get to in a minute. There's some other packaging. It's very, in the digital age, it's fun to do vinyl because you get this thing in the mail that is actually, the thing, the physical object, which for me, growing up in the era when music was very much something that you needed to have money to buy, and was very attached to the physical, it's very satisfying. Diego Garcia is actually a Barcelona-based musician who reached out to me years ago, and we've done a number of projects together. And so this is, right now I'm working on a new, this label called Jazz is Dead in LA. And it's founded by Adrian Young and Ali Shaheed Muhammad from Tribe Called Quest. And they're doing all these albums where they collaborate with older jazz musicians. And I've already designed a series of 9 records that are starting to come out. And this is just a part of the packaging, but they're very elaborate die-cut packaging. They haven't come back from the factory yet. But so this has really been exciting because it's getting to work with these really legendary musicians, or work not with them, but on their projects. So one of the more fun things I've done in recent years was I designed the identity for Nuits Sonores, the electronic music festival in Lyon. And this is a festival that draws thousands of people to Lyon each year. And this is, in a sense, the biggest thing I've ever done, because I designed this sort of the visual identity, and they put it on everything all over the city. And so it's very satisfying, and they also flew me to Lyon for the festival, which was really great. So it's very exciting to show up and see all of these huge posters using my system, especially because in America, posters are not as big as they are in Europe. There just aren't as many places to put posters in regular cities. I mean, in New York, it's one thing, but every place else. So you're lucky if you have, an A4 poster, basically. And so to have the classic European-sized posters up was very satisfying, even on the cups. So these are sort of just some examples of illustration. My illustration style is a very sort of limited, very flat, a lot of solid colors. And recently, this is my first foray into actual editorial illustration, but I've started illustrating a medical advice column for The Atlantic. So, moving on, before I get to the art project, I wanted to talk a little bit about Instagram. And for me, I think I don't call myself an Instagrammer when people ask me what I do. But the reality is that almost all of my clients, I think, find me via Instagram. You know, it's the way that people know my work, and it's the way that I get work. And so I take it very seriously. And part of why I built up a number of followers is, let's get to this, is that my strategy is that I started, well, let's go back one. Before Instagram, back in 2009, I had a blog. And at the time, there were a number of people doing projects where they were going to post one a day of something, like, you know, a picture every day for a year. And a friend of mine started a project where he was posting a book from his library every day and writing something about it. And I thought that was really kind of inspired me, because I always would buy these books because I thought the graphics were cool, or because I thought the illustrations were good. And then, you know, you have a book sitting around and no one to show it to and nothing to do. You know, what do you do with it? So then I posted a book every day for a year. And I mean, I ran out of my own books very quickly. And then I started going to secondhand shops and going to used bookstores and places where I could find cheap books, and books that sort of I was interested in. And first, if you go back and look at my blog, my Flickr page, it's very all over the place. Like, there's some things that look like this, these modernist covers, and then there are many things that are just interesting for other reasons. But over the years, I started to really get specific about what I liked. The whole process made me far, far more sensitive to design than I'd been before. So my parents have a lot of books, and like, I went to look through their books and I picked out a bunch of things the first time, but then I went 6 months later and all these things that I wasn't interested in the first time were interesting to me the second time. And like, each time I was more sensitive to type, to design, composition. Like, it was part of this kind of self-education. And so as I blogged, I kept blogging for a few years, basically trying to post every day. And I really kind of started to hone in on what it was that I was interested in, which is mid-century graphic design and book covers that use really simple graphics to kind of express complicated ideas. And these books are very, there's a lot of famous designers that people know, but I'm really interested in the designers that people don't know and discovering things. And what's fun about the process is hunting for these books, and you find something that basically, essentially no one's seen or no one's ever posted online, and then posting it, and you're giving this designer another chance to be seen, and sort of adding to the knowledge that we have about graphic design and about this kind of creativity. So on my Instagram feed, so after I blogged for a while and then realizing around 2013 that Instagram would be a good fit for me, I started just posting books on that. So now I still post book covers, I post other mid-century graphic design, and I think of Instagram as a space that I curate, where I'm finding things that I find interesting and presenting to people. And every like fifth or sixth post, I might post some of my own work. And I think the value of this, as I said, is that the process of curation makes me think more about design. And I think of it as a project, a creative project, like my other sort of self-initiated projects. I think it's an important way for me to and I don't know, when I wake up in the morning, I don't know necessarily what I'm going to post. So it makes me have to think about that every day, which I really appreciate. And then, of course, I'm putting my own work in context with these things that I'm posting. And because I'm posting things that are in this aesthetic world that I'm interested in, it really it gives people, when they're looking to hire me, they understand what they're getting is someone who understands a certain visual language. And I think that's been very beneficial to me over the years. I mean, I know it has. This is just a classic example of the kind of thing that I love, like a very, some sort of sans serif font and some colorful, almost abstract graphic. Like it's sort of what I'm seeking out. And what I strive to kind of make when I'm making design as well. These are other examples of things that I've fascinated by. I often try to post things where I'm several by the same designer at once, or things that have a visual connection. So the other thing about Instagram too is that in the past, when in the 90s or the early 2000s, like you could make something on your own, and then that was it. Like what would you do with it? You could make a poster, but then no one is ever going to see it. And I'm sure a lot of the audience has, very much grown up in this digital environment. But one of the great things about the age that we live in for artists, designers, anybody who works in a visual medium or any other medium really, is that like you can post something and have an audience, or have it go viral, or have all these things happen. And that's one of the things I also love about Instagram is it's not only a space that I curate, but it's a space where I can make something and put it out there, and it can be, people can interact with it. They can say if they like it or don't like it. And I just try to recognize, because I know a lot of artists who don't, more contemporary artists who don't engage with Instagram too much. And I'm always telling them, you really should be on this platform, because in the past, you would send slides, physical slides, you would mail them to a gallery in New York, and you would hope that they like held them up to the light and looked at them and maybe were interested. And it just is very much a shot in the dark, and you sort of really one person at a time you had to contact to see your work. And now it's, even if you don't have that many followers, you can post something and you don't know who's going to see it. And working in a visual medium, it really matters. Like, to find the people that are interested in what you do means you need to get out there as much as you can. I'm always telling my friends, like, you really need to work harder on this. And also because like I said, I believe it's the process of doing it is beneficial. It can become a project if you think about it as a space where you are the curator. Okay, so this is an overview of some of my art projects, and they're pretty weird in some ways. So this is we'll start here. This is a project. So when I was figuring out what I wanted to do in the late 90s, I finished college, and I had a job just working as an intern at a design studio. At an office, a company that made science education materials, and I was in the sort of design department. And I had sort of ideas of doing art, but I really wanted to. I came up with this idea of making a project where I created a language to speak about the ways that shopping carts, or shopping trolleys, you might call them, move through the urban environment. And when I started it, I thought it would just be a small thing where I could kind of practice my graphic design by making up this system. And then it became a much bigger thing where the project sort of took on a life of its own and became this very elaborate photography project that also involved graphic design. And it's very much about language and the way that naming changes the way that we see things. So this is this is my entire system, which is this elaborate system that actually sort of functions as a way to identify shopping carts. And this, you sort of have all these different categories, like simple vandalism and complex vandalism. It's a very, very involved project. And it was my feel, but you can see here where I'm using graphic design to create the authoritative voice. And this was just something I started on just on my own, just thinking I would make like a little thing to put in my friend's zine. And then it grew bigger and bigger each time I worked. And then people became interested, and people asked me to do gallery shows. And I also became a much better photographer through the course of this, where for several years, I went all over looking for shopping carts in strange situations, which is not very hard to find, because in this country anyway, I think it's maybe less so in Europe, but you find carts in very strange positions. And you find them everywhere once you start looking. So it really became kind of about exploring the urban environment and kind of finding this way to articulate and give language to something that we know but don't really know. It's hard to see there, but it's in there. And there were hundreds of photographs as part of this project. And snow is a big part of where I live. And this is what happens when the snow plow hits the shopping carts and they're shattered. So again, one sees where the design kind of crosses over. And this is in the gallery shows. I was making larger photographs, and I wanted to find a way to take the language and put it onto the walls and kind of make these connections. These are all things that would be very difficult to do if I didn't have a background in design to even do this project at all. This is in New York, in Chelsea, in I think 2006. So the book, the project eventually became a book because I had designed a poster, a poster in the pre-viral days, back in 2006, 2004 actually. I made a publication, a folding poster that explained my shopping cart system, a little bit like the image I showed you before. And I thought, I'm going to hand out this poster for free in New York, and hopefully to get to people who would be interested in this project. And that worked. Like I was at an art fair with my gallery, and someone who worked for Abrams, which is a large book company, I gave him the poster, and he took it to an editor, and they asked me if I'd thought of doing a book, and I had. So I mocked up some chapters, and we did a pitch, and they bought the book. And so then this book came out in 2006, and it's the great part is, I designed the entire thing, like all of the layout, everything. It had an editor, but basically had creative control. And then this book, in a very funny way, became well known because it won the prize for the strangest book title of 2006. So there was a lot of newspaper coverage around the world, and I was interviewed on the radio, on the BBC. So it was a very strange kind of moment. And now the people that follow me generally don't even know, like, this project is part of my background. So after I did this years-long project involving exploring the urban environment, I became interested in exploring the domestic environment, in exploring the spaces in our homes. So a lot of that has to do with spiders. So I was doing a lot of macro photography, which, as you can see here, this is fairly close. And what happened is I developed a project where I captured spiders and sort of preserved them, looked at their faces through a microscope, and then drew them, and then made a fabric banner that I hung up where I found the spider, and then photographed it on a medium format camera. So, and these were large prints. So this is my aunt's garage in Florida, where I captured a certain spider. And spider faces are very strange and different shapes and things. But I was interested in kind of making these banners to hang to kind of recognize this alien presence. And this project also went on for a number of years, and then developed into something much more complicated. This is an example of what it looked like installed. So these banners are all fabric. So I cut the fabric out and ironed it on to a canvas. So ultimately, this project had its sort of biggest show, and there are the photographs, there are these banners, and there are many, many different other elements. I kind of built a world around this idea that there was a sort of almost a fictional character who's very interested in the intersection of animals and architecture. And what I realized I could do at a certain point in this project was I could make, these are photographs, one second. I realized I could make fake book covers, fictional books that were the reading material of my character. So these are library books where I designed a new cover and put it underneath the plastic so that it looked instantly old. And so I started making these books, and because I'd been Instagramming and blogging about mid-century book design, I felt very familiar with that language. And I just started making books that related to the theme somehow of animals and architecture. Some of them are like kind of crazy, some of them are believable. But when I put them in my exhibitions, the effect is that the viewer looks at the book and it makes them have to think about, even if they know it's fake, they have to sort of think about what would that book be about. It's a way of controlling what they're imagining, or sort of encouraging them to imagine a certain something. So, and it also, back to my theme is that this was a great opportunity to just make design that I wanted to see. Things that were just like pleasurable to make. And it's very different from client-based work, because with a fake book, sometimes you have the idea for the image and then you write the title, right? So it's not at all the same kind of thing, but nevertheless, it's still a kind of visual problem solving that, even though I'm doing this in the fine art realm, it really is, ultimately kind of a design project. And I'm also drawing on design history, where I want to make these things look like they could really be from that era. And so, and also trying to make things that are just on the edge of being like weird enough to exist or not exist. And I think there's something like maybe 70 different books in this series. And, as I was saying, oftentimes when people are coming to me and asking me to design something, sometimes they'll show me some of these things from my website and they'll say, I want you to do something that's like a little bit like this. And almost all of this material is generated by me. So I take the photographs. If there are photographs, I've taken the photograph. If there's an illustration, I've made the illustration. Or in this case, making a painting as well. But I believe in sort of making these things. There's some friends of mine holding up one of my destroyed banners of a spider, and this elaborate story that is part of another sub part of the project. It's all too complicated. But in exhibitions, the books and posters were really, I also did posters for this. It's kind of an interesting way, because they sort of exist as sculptural objects, but also as prints. And the books, I just take old books and they're about some other subject and put the new cover on it. And it's very funny when you present these, people feel like they should be allowed to pick them up and look at them, which they really shouldn't. But this is a show I did on the left in Canada and on the right in France in 2013. So that project kind of continued on in different ways, and I made different kinds of installations, I did a series of photographs of webs, just all different kinds of approaches. I like to, as with the shopping carts, have a central idea and then build out all this work from that central idea. So after working on that very complicated project, I wanted to do something simple, and I ended up doing a series of paintings. I was still interested in the connection between language and image, and as you can probably tell through all the things I do, like, I'm fascinated with the idea of the poster and of the book cover, where you have an image and you have some language, and they have to relate to each other. And it's sort of a very simple, they can make each other more complicated, simple. And I wanted to do like landscape painting, but in a different way, kind of like in a poster form. So I did these wall paintings for a gallery exhibition. And then I made a whole series where there were different things you would find in the landscape or the environment, or different events, like a sunset or a sunrise. And I'm interested in the different ways you could let each one, like a a mountain could be a peak. It could, it could also be mountain, or it could be, so just these very, almost like, after my complicated projects, I wanted to make almost absurdly simple work. And obviously, this is really speaking the language of graphic design and of illustration. So the lines get very fuzzy here, where I'm essentially I'm putting this in my contemporary art because I'm doing it with purpose. I'm with that purpose in mind. I'm making these as paintings, but it doesn't look too different from the kinds of illustrations that I make also. And I'm trying to make these almost as deliberately simple as possible, to be almost, funny. All these projects I have have an undercurrent of humor. Okay, so that's my fine art, those projects, which are things that are in galleries and sometimes in museums. But then I also make work that's, I think of as more in between art and design, more in the illustration end of the spectrum. And it started back in, I guess, 2012. I had a friend who had a small company that did on-demand printing, or had various like old photographs and things you could buy online. And he commissioned me to do a series of prints, and I decided to do the 50 states of America, with each one each state has an official fruit or an official bird or official stone. So I did a whole series based on that. So I did 50 different prints. And again, the great thing about the digital age is, people only bought the New York print, but I could still have all 50, and some of them quite weird, online, and they all sort of existed in this virtual space. But this is what became this kind of work where I was trying to make things, sort of design that I liked, that I wouldn't consider, contemporary art, almost like an experiment. Like, can I make something that I like that people would buy? The answer is sort of. These don't sell a ton, but they do. They're out there on a few different platforms and are available for sale. So I think of this also as a kind of just a self-start project where I just kind of like think of some image I want to see, and I think, well, what would does this work? Would this be, this is something people would be interested in? And again, these things also sometimes move on to a second life, which we'll get to in a second. But again, these are also things that in this space, I can do all sorts of things that don't have to connect to my other main themes. And this, I don't know if anyone will ever buy this poster of ghosts, but I don't know, I like it. Also tote bags, you have to have tote bags. So one of the things I've been working on the last few years, and it's kind of driven what I do, is, after I started making fake books, or what I would call kind of design fictions, I just thought that was such a great medium, and I realized the power that it had to both engage the viewer and like give me a space to kind of make all these different ideas happen. And so the next thing that I came up with after the Animals and Architecture project was I came up with a fictional 1970s gallery. And I started making exhibition posters. And what was great about this is that it allowed me this space where I could conceptually make kind of anything, sort of take some loose visual idea I had and then sort of transform it into art or some show. And sometimes there were some appropriations, like that's a Bruegel print on the left. But then these other just ideas that I had in my head that I thought were weird, like as if there were an exhibition of people taking photographs from trains, from 1860 to 1975. Like, I liked that idea of where I could present this to the viewer. And even if you didn't, it's not real, but like part of you is like, well, you have to think, what would the exhibition look like? And I like that process. And so I've made many, many things in this project. And it's a great space where it's letting, I can make all these, play with a lot of design elements that I'm interested in, and then also sort of recontextualize work that I've already made, like photographs I've taken for other reasons. Both of these are photographs that I took in my life just generally. And then now I've made them into part of some, a photography show or some very strange project about speaking to animals. I sometimes take pictures of my friends and make them into artists. And just sometimes they're meant to be like a little funny. Sometimes they're just an idea, just a visual idea I kind of have the desire to create. But it also allowed my art practice to be a little less focused on conceptual projects and make me use a lot of different materials. Like I started using more paint. I started using all sorts of different techniques to kind of bring these things to life. And of course, I'm still like this, on the right, like that's, it's moving me. The whole process has moved me forward as a designer and also as an illustrator too, and just sort of like forced me to learn in new ways. Sort of somehow obsessed with these fictional Canadian exhibitions. But this is like an art project, sometimes I do sell. I have sold pieces from this, but ultimately it's really just a kind of a self-initiated design project, which I'll also have exhibitions of it, which is also very satisfying. Just as a designer, you kind of always want to see, you love a wall of posters, and so I've taken the opportunity to make it myself. And this, I also do some things where, like, it's a photograph I took from the art gallery, and I superimposed my fictional piece onto the image. I also did books related to the Thorold Gallery is the name of my fictional gallery, but there are books connected to it. And also, basically, as the project went on, at first I was imagining it as this small gallery, and then it became a bigger museum, and then it was a giant museum, and now it's this fictional world that I can just build into anything I want. So it also has a recording label, or a series of records where they've made recordings of things. This is my sister here, as playing Astrid Hellstrom. So the funny thing happened is that I'd been making fake paintings, in quotes, for my fictional artists. And then that I was asked by the gallery that I worked with to actually display some of those paintings, which I did. And then people actually bought the paintings. So I was sort of making these kind of ironic paintings. Making things that I liked. But my fake art had brought me into making real art. So then I had my first exhibition of my posters was called Fictions. And then I had a follow-up exhibition of my new line of painting inspired by that work called Semi-Fictions. This is just last year. And so I made this weird transition where I was making this more. I started taking it more seriously, making these works, and it was a little different for me just thinking in this mode. But it was a thing where my fictional design project had just brought me to a completely different place that I don't think I would have gotten to just on my own. It was just an interesting progression. And then I've done fairly well with people actually like buying these as paintings. And I have strived to make things that I like, simple things, but paintings that I'm interested in. And again, I post these on Instagram as well. And then of course, I refolded myself back into my fictional world, where I become this fictional Swedish artist, and then we're back. It's come full circle all the way around. So I also, one of the interesting things, this is some of my art boards from Illustrator. And one of the things for the last 2 years I've changed how I work, in that I spend a lot of time, this is how I basically compose my paintings. And, I just like have an Illustrator document where I just keep making one thing after another, making tweaks to something or a different direction. And this is my way of sketching. And which is how I would normally, in the past, I'd work on logos, work on other ideas. But for this, it was just kind of trying to find these combinations of shapes to make paintings. And this has turned out to be very useful to me, both as an artist and as a designer. Because in a sense, I now have this like just big backlog of kind of images and shapes. And sometimes like I'll do a design project, and some of the things that don't make the cut in the design project might be sort of abstract shapes, which then I put into this world, and that becomes part of it. So things I design influence the kinds of paintings I make, and then the paintings I make, or these sketches I make, also influence my design. And so like then I get to things where I was asked to do these like large murals in this abandoned school as part of a big art project. So I'm using the visual language I've developed in these paintings and applying it in a much larger way. Starting to do more work like this. I did a mural also is in a school lunchroom here in Buffalo. But these are all sort of the nuts and bolts of my my sketching. This is a bathroom I painted in a literary center. And then, again, how it comes back to design, this is actually also Diego Garcia, the Barcelona-based musician. But so in designing these covers for him, I reached back into the language of my paintings and some of the shapes that I created for that. So I just now really believe in this way of just generating content and ideas, just not knowing where it's going to go, which is a lot of the way artists work. But I think designers don't often work that way, and I'm finding it very useful to just spend that time rearranging shapes and just seeing what happens, and just because it takes time to figure out what is going to develop or where it's going to go. So there are other cases in my fiction, where my fictional work has actually just directly become my design work. So in this case, I had made this poster using a photograph I'd taken of a friend. She's actually laughing. She's an artist. This is her art opening. And so le pleurant, like that's a crying, what you call a crying statue in French. And so in my fictional world, she's a performance artist. And then I was designing a book, and the author had seen this, and she really felt that that was the image that worked for her book. So in this case, it was just a direct thing where we're like, can we use this? And I said, sure, why not? And then this is Uncle Acid and the Deadbeats are the sort of doom metal band. And the band came to me, and they had they really liked this image that I'd done. So we kind of, and combined with some other things I'd done. So we worked, so I kind of reappropriated some of the basics of this to create this cover, but that was like what they requested. And then part of my, there was a car earlier in my sort of more commercial prints, and I did this series of cars, which I was selling online. I mean, individual posters as well. And then I was asked by this design organization in Breda, in the Netherlands, to do a series of, they have 50 posters that cover the walls, and so I adapted that project for this. And then this project eventually, Continental Tires hired me to illustrate their classic cars that shipped out of the factory with Continental Tires. So it's this thing where this random idea I had at one point just goes on and kind of develops into something. I believe that is basically, oh yeah, well, one more thing. I've now developed this idea beyond just digitally sketching. I've taken years of paper cuttings that I have from various projects, and I've started arranging them and photographing them just kind of as a way of very quickly making designs and just seeing where that goes, basically, as a way of kind of sketching. But I believe that is basically what I have to say. So I think, Carlos,
I'm here.
Okay, you were there? Okay.
let me volume. I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, Julian. It was very inspiring that you showed to us. I have some, just before we finish, I have a few questions to you. What do you think? What do you define more to you, the artist, graphic designer, photographer?
I'm definitely not photographer. I don't own enough equipment to really be a photographer. No, but I think to me, artist and designer are equal. I mean, so many things that inspire me are graphic design, and I don't think of it as art up here and design is down here. I think they're very. I can't have one without the other for me.
Okay, great. Ken from Amsterdam are asking the vinyl covers are much inspired by the early jazz scene.
About what?
No, Cohen is asking if the vinyl covers are much inspired in the early jazz scene.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, and like for the jazz covers that I'm doing now, they reached out to me because they knew I worked with a lot of modernist images. Like they wanted that old feeling. Yeah, very inspired by Blue Note records in the 60s, 50s and 60s. Yeah.
Okay. More questions. What is your favorite or the project that you are more proud? Because you now show a lot of projects, but
yeah, I don't know. It's in some ways I think the fictional exhibition posters I'm proud of because there's so many different ideas in there, and sometimes when I go to see art exhibitions, I feel like, oh, there's one idea, and it's like I wanted to do a show where there are many, many ideas. So I feel proud about that.
Okay, and the less?
The least proud? Well, yeah, I can show you what I'm the least proud of. So, yeah, I've done many things where, there are many things where I'm like, I would make my decisions differently now. But
okay, and in the context, that we are calling the new normal, it's gonna change the rules of the design I think for sure the message, no? But you think you're gonna change some rules of the design in the next months, years?
I mean, what I'm struck with, I don't know how it's going to change, but I think what's interesting, what I think is really going to change is also art, right? Because without galleries, and everybody's a YouTuber now, kind of. Do you know what I mean? Like everybody exists online, and in a way that has great democratic potential.
Yeah.
You see the TV star is sitting in front of his computer just like the regular person is. We're all on the same level. So I don't know. Maybe some of these old institutions will change. I don't know how design's going to change, though. It's hard. Very hard to say. But
okay. The DM asks, "Hey Julian, thank you for the presentation. I really admire the modernist aesthetics of your design and the book covers you share. In your opinion, what is the essence of this epoch style?"
the essence, I think it's the essence is obviously to be as simple as you can be. Essentially, that's to me like what is the best thing about it is you have to illustrate a very big idea, and you do it in some very simple way that still kind of works. Something very abstract. I think that's to me that's the essence of it. Is an abstract solution to a complex idea.
Okay, and Alejandro asks you, do you advise a designer to develop a particular style to be versatile enough to adapt to and explore different styles?
Yeah, I think it's complicated because I think you do need to be versatile. And when I was younger, I was worried that because people would warn you, you don't want to have a style because then if once that style's out of fashion, no one wants you, or they won't hire you because they think you can't do another thing. And so I think you need to be careful. But then there are two parts of it. You know, when you have a style, like now I have a style, and people come to me because they want that style, so they don't ask me to do something I don't want to do. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But I think when you're younger and starting out, I think you have to make sure you show in your portfolio that you do many different, you can do it all, I think is really important. Because then at a certain point, I still think I can do versatile work, but no one remembers the thing I do that doesn't look like the things they know. Do you know? So you can't, you'll get trapped eventually. So.
Okay, so your advice is that try different.
Yeah, no, always be open. Don't get trapped and say, this is my thing, you know. Because I think you need to always be open. And that's what I'm, in a way, saying, you know, in these projects is like, you know, yeah, you can go make up something and try a completely different direction. You know, like you never know where you're going to end up. Like I'm all about experimentation. So.
Okay, great. What potential do you think lies in it for the future? I don't know. I don't understand the question. What potential do you think lies in the future?
It's a very broad question.
Okay. So thank you so much, Julian. We enjoy a lot with your talk. I hope to see you soon here in LABASAD and here in Barcelona. You are always welcome.
That would be wonderful. Love that.
When this new normal, you know, became a normal, maybe we can meet in person.
That would be very cool. Very cool.
Thanks again, Julian.
All right. Thank you.
See ya.
Okay.
See ya. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Yeah. And for the rest, we will see you again in the next international talk on 25th of June with Design Studio from London. So see you in a while. Okay. Bye-bye.